Fellas, if you know me, you'll know I'm the baddest man on the planet. So today, we're going to be doing times when the bad guy won in the UFC. Now, this basically means when the heel beat the face, or the guy that everyone wanted to lose beat the guy that everyone wanted to win, or the bad guy beat the good guy, essentially. That is just what we're doing. There's been various examples of this across MMA, and I've picked out the most relevant ones of different times. Some are recent, some aren't as recent, but here are good examples of times when the bad guy won in the UFC. If you agree with this, please let me know, but we're going to go straight in there with the first example, which is Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier, both fights. Daniel Cormier is this happy man, is this happy businessman, he's his family guy. He's a really good guy, great fighter, Olympic gold medalist, and Jon Jones comes in after beating his wife with steroids, with the whole criminal thing going on, all this controversial stuff, and it's kind of like the good guy versus the bad guy in both of the fights. And at this point, Jones isn't just the villain of Daniel Cormier, he's the villain of the UFC. It's like the hero versus the villain. They had a huge rivalry. This is one of the most popular rivalries in the UFC. One of my favourite rivalries in the UFC. They hate each other. And Daniel Cormier coming into this was the good guy, and Jon Jones was the bad guy. And Jones beat him twice. Now, I know the second one was technically a no contest because Jones was on steroids and he got overturned. But at the end of the day, Daniel Cormier didn't win both times. So that's why I'm putting it. Cormier just wasn't good enough to beat Jones. Jones, being the villain he is, managed to get the win over Cormier and beat him twice. This was a perfect... Even the build-up to the fight, the way Jones was talking about Cormier, the interviews, the face-off where they had a massive brawl, it was Jones just messing around with Cormier the whole time and getting in his head. And Cormier couldn't really do anything. In their fights, he was pretty much useless. Jones was better everywhere the fight went. Even when it was wrestling, Jones was winning. So Jones dominated both of the fights. The huge rivalry went to Jones, and even after the fights, they still had a little bit of beef together, but Jones was just better than Cormier, and that's what happened. And this is a perfect example of a bad guy in Jones beating the good guy in Cormier. You can use a couple of other examples of Jones beating people because he's meant to be the bad guy, but I think this is the best example because Cormier is one of the happiest, nicest guys in the UFC, and to match him against a criminal, that this villain type guy, this heel, this criminal, to make them fight each other, and Jones wins both times. Perfect example of the villain winning, and that is my number one spot. Number two, I'm going to go more recent, UFC 279, Khamzat Chimaev versus Kevin Holland. Now again, you can use a lot of fights for Khamzat Chimaev because he is kind of like this stereotypical Dagestani villain, but I think Khamzat Chimaev was the perfect villain for this fight, and Kevin Holland was the perfect kind of like the good guy because Kevin Holland was a fan favourite. He's always been a fan favourite in the UFC, and coming into this fight, everyone wanted to see Khamzat versus Diaz. We wanted to see Holland. Who's Holland supposed to fight? I forgot who Holland was supposed to fight. He might have been Daniel Rodriguez, but I think it was D-Rod, so we wanted to see Holland fight, and then Khamzat missed weight by 8 pounds. Now, when a fighter misses weight, they get disgraced by everyone. They get disgraced by media. The fans boo them. And for this point in time, Khamzat was getting booed by the crowd after missing weight by 8 pounds. That's £8 difference. Like Michael Pereira was getting, he was getting hit for missing by 3 pounds, and then you've got Khamzat missing weight by 8 pounds. And then he goes to the weigh-in, flips everyone off, shows disrespect. Diaz was no longer fighting Khamzat. Everyone was mad at him, even in the walkout getting booed. And Holland was a fan favourite who made weight. And at this point, everyone wanted Holland to win. They wanted the good guy to beat Khamzat, the cocky Khamzat Chimaev. But that just wasn't the case. Khamzat Chimaev goes in the fight, absolutely ragdolls Kevin Holland in a couple of seconds, dominates him, mauls him, and then gets a submission, grabs the mic and starts irritating and annoying everyone in the crowd. And this is a perfect example of a bad guy beating the good guy. Khamzat being this, people call him the evil Khabib, the evil Khabib, with, very dominant fight style, likes to trash talk a lot, and the fact that he missed weight by such a high, 8 pounds as well, that's a huge amount. And Kevin Holland was a fan favourite, so this, for me, is another example of a bad guy in Khamzat beating a good guy in Kevin Holland. You could have used Khamzat versus Gilbert Burns, but I feel like Khamzat wasn't really hated during that, where I feel like this fight, there was so much hate towards Khamzat, so I'm going to say this is another example. Next up, we have Brandon Moreno versus Deiveson Figueiredo 3. Brandon Moreno is one of the most liked people in UFC. It's kind of impossible to dislike Brandon Moreno. He's kind of like this, kid-like family guy who he's never said a bad thing in his life. Deiveson Figueiredo is kind of like this guy who walks around with his team, mocking Brandon Moreno from Brazil. And this fight was the third fight they had. The first one was a draw. The second one, I think it was a Brandon Moreno win. And Deiveson Figueiredo won this fight. It was pretty close, but Deiveson Figueiredo won. Moreno's one of the biggest liked people in the company. And Figueiredo was kind of disliked a lot by the MMA community. A lot of fans disliked him because they didn't really like the way he approached himself with his team. And, the fight with Moreno made a lot of people dislike him because Moreno's one of the, even Pantoja. Pantoja's not even he's just a normal fighter. But then when he fought Moreno, everyone was booing him in the press conference. So Figueiredo was getting a lot of boos. And he also kind of riled up Moreno fans on the mic during their fights. He liked to trash talk a little bit towards Moreno, which no one really does to Moreno. And then Figueiredo goes out there and takes the belt off Moreno, the maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. Grabs the belt from him, makes it his own, takes the belt, and Figueiredo's the champ, and Moreno's no longer the champ that everyone liked. One of the most liked champs, just Figueiredo comes in and robs him in their third fight. Luckily, in the fourth fight, Moreno won, but yeah, this is a time when a lot of MMA fans really dislike Deiveson Figueiredo simply just for fighting Brandon Moreno, but that's an example of a good guy losing to a bad guy. Next up, Colby Covington versus Demian Maia. This is the fight that made Colby Covington kind of like this trash-talking villain of the UFC. Before this, he wasn't really known for his trash talk. He was just an average fighter kind of guy. This fight made him into Colby Covington. The fight was in Brazil, which is Demian Maia's home country, so there was a lot of Brazilian fans booing for Colby Covington. Because every single time we go to Brazil, it's not even just like the Brazilian fighters will absolutely flame. They will hate whoever's fighting the Brazilian guy. They cheer for the Brazilian guy and boo for the other guy. So you can expect what this was like. Demian Maia getting all the cheers and Covington getting the boos. And Covington became the heel in this fight. He laughed at him in the fight and pretty much dominated the entire fight. It wasn't really difficult for Colby Covington. And he riled up the crowd. Obviously, the iconic post-fight interview where he disrespected Brazil and the Brazilian fans were throwing bottles at him. The Brazilian fans hated him. This was a perfect example of a bad guy beating a good guy. Demian Maia being, one of Brazil's favourite fighters. On a it wasn't a main event, but it was a main event. It was a fight night main event, I think. Covington comes in, destroys him, and that was what made Covington, really. He became a villain in this fight, disrespected Brazil, disrespected everyone. The fans hated him. They all wanted Demian Maia to win. Covington was just disrespecting Brazil, and the Brazilian fans just didn't want Covington to win. So this is a perfect example for me of a good guy in Demian Maia losing to a bad guy in Colby Covington. Again, you can use Covington for other examples like Masvidal. I just feel like the Masvidal, I don't think we can use Masvidal actually, because Masvidal isn't exactly a nice guy. He's got some dodgy stuff going on in his life. Maybe the Robbie Lawler fight you can use, but I think this is a good example because it's one of the biggest heels in Covington's career. Next, Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo. Conor McGregor is one of the biggest villains in the UFC, and this was one fight where he really portrayed that. The whole build-up to the fight was McGregor just mocking Aldo, robbing the belt at the press conferences, talking in Brazilian, getting in his face, and Jose Aldo had never dealt with this in his career before. At this time, Jose Aldo was the defending featherweight. He was one of the greatest, at this time, he was the greatest featherweight of all time. This massive career, this massive winning streak in UFC and out of the UFC. The best featherweight of all time. McGregor came in, disrespected him, slept him in 13 seconds and took the belt off him like it was nothing. Jose Aldo had never had a fight like this in his life. The build-up to the fight, he had never experienced this. McGregor truly got in his head. And, Jose Aldo was kind of like this nice Brazilian guy. McGregor was this trash-talking Irishman who was new to the UFC, this cocky Irishman. And he just slept Aldo and took his belt off him in 13 seconds. No one really expected this. You look at the build up to this fight. A lot of MMA reporters, a lot of MMA fighters were picking Jose Aldo to win this fight because he was so good. But McGregor just came in and took the belt off him, and he played the bad guy so perfectly. Jose Aldo trying to defend his belt, but McGregor just came in, trash talked everything about him, disrespected him, disrespected his legacy. And now, unfortunately, a lot of casual MMA fans only remember Jose Aldo for being the guy that got knocked out by McGregor. So This was a great example of a good guy losing to a bad guy, McGregor being the bad guy. And yeah, you could have used some other examples, like I said, with McGregor. You could have used maybe Donald Cerrone, but I wouldn't say McGregor was a bad guy going into that fight. He was pretty, he's pretty respectful. Maybe the first Poirier fight, but I think this is I think it's the most popular fight besides Khabib of McGregor's career, and it was the perfect good guy versus bad guy. And finally, I'm gonna go Jorge Masvidal versus Darren Till. Masvidal was never really this, I won't call him a villain, but he was definitely not the favourite to win. Darren Till, I think at this point he'd lost to Tyrone Woodley and he needed a comeback fight. I think this was after the Woodley fight. It was supposed to be an easy fight for Till. Masvidal, I think he was coming off a loss to Wonderboy, and he'd taken a lot of time out of MMA. Darren Till only had like one loss on his record at this point. This prospect from the UK who knows what to say on the mic, very high hopes for future. And realistically, this fight night, I think it was in Liverpool or London. This was supposed to be an easy fight for Till. Till was supposed to go out there, destroy Masvidal, and come back and then maybe fight for a belt or fight for a number one contender spot. And Masvidal ruined the party. He came in, slept Darren Till pretty comfortably, and the crowd was silent. You watched that knockout, the crowd literally went silent. A new star was born in Jorge Masvidal. No one really expected this because everyone expected Till to win. This was the first time Till had actually been like put to sleep in his career. He got knocked out cold brutally. And everyone was so surprised by this fight. Till trying to be the good guy, coming in, getting a win, the favourite. Everyone kind of wanted him to win. No one really knew Masvidal at the time. And Masvidal, kind of like this dark horse, didn't really talk much at this time. No one really knew who he was. And he came in, made a name for himself and won by sleeping Till. And this is a good example of the bad guy beating the good guy. Like I said, I wouldn't say Masvidal is necessarily a bad guy, but it kind of follows the storyline of the good guy in Till losing unexpectedly. But this is a good example of a good guy beating a bad guy. Please let me know. Sorry, a bad guy beating a good guy. Please let me know if I missed any big fights out. And yeah, please let me know if you agree with this. Thank you.